Good morning, everybody. I decided to do a video this week. So let's see. I'm just going to bring up the questions here so I can make sure that I answer all of them. So it said, consider you were asked to assist a child who is isolated from others or an adolescent who has experienced complex stressors at home and in their community. After learning about the Sparks program, I think that my bias is going to be towards that program. I utilize and really enjoy doing creative therapies with a lot of the nonverbal kids that I work with right now, and I find it extremely beneficial. But I'm also a certified DBT instructor, and I think the world of dialectical behavior therapy. I taught 4 groups a week for a year, and I think that there's extreme therapeutic value to participating in those groups for lots of different people, adults, adolescents, young children. I think there's a lot to learn for everybody, including myself. I learned a lot from the program. So the Sparks program incorporates a lot of what DBT does as well. And so for this question, I went with an adolescent who was experiencing complex stressors at home and in the community. So it says, select one of the treatment modalities presented this week and discuss how you would prepare to engage in a therapeutic relationship with this client. Initially, I would definitely start out with an assessment. So for Sparks, we would be looking at the trauma history checklist, youth outcome questionnaire, self-report, and the CANS, the strengths and needs assessment. Those would all be really beneficial in helping to determine what types of needs and stressors the child is experiencing. I'm going to say that this child is experiencing ongoing stress at home and struggling with functioning difficulties like affect regulation and impulsivity. In that circumstance, the Sparks program would be appropriate for this child. And this child, I'm going to assume, is also verbal. I would want to know what stressors they're experiencing, what needs aren't being met, and I'm going to go right to the last question here is, how would you include the client's parents or guardians? I think that the initial assessment process is an important place to include the parents and guardians, maybe not in the first session with the child because you want to get an idea of what's going on from both of them separately, but including the parents or guardians in the overall 16 weeks of sessions is really important so that they have an understanding of what the child feels is not being met for their needs or wants. So how would you address cultural and diverse differences between you and the client? Well, that could mean a wide variety of things. Luckily, the Sparks program has different cultural and language adaptations. And so, if we needed to use those or if we needed to use an interpreter, we could definitely do that. I would also, the Sparks program specific information does talk about different cultures that experience difficulty with this program and different like dropouts and things like that. So I would want to be more aware of that. So like this says, just for example, in the evidence-based practices pilot in Illinois, African-American adolescents receiving Sparks were less likely to drop out of treatment than youth receiving treatment as usual. And so, that's something to consider when you're doing the Sparks program, that it may be more beneficial for young African-American teenagers than a typical therapeutic intervention would be. So I think the biggest thing about cultural differences is first recognizing them and then identifying what adaptations would be needed and then implementing them. Goals for the first session would be to do the assessment, identify the symptoms, what the needs are, and then talk about the program and the expectations, and go over, you know, what the plan is. And if we're talking about Sparks, it's going to be 16 weeks of sessions, and there's very specific criteria for each of those weeks. And so what I would want to do is go over that and what that would look like, and so it wouldn't feel like a surprise, or, you know, like they didn't know what was going on. I would definitely encourage participation from family members, especially where this child is having ongoing stressors at home and in the community. We may want to involve some natural supports. We may want to involve some school faculty if it seems warranted. And yeah, so I think the Sparks program would be the best therapeutic intervention for this child in this circumstance.